life's now gone. If you I'm muted. Good evening. Welcome to Tux TV. I'm your host, Jimmy Tux. I am, let me get me full screen. Welcome to Tux TV, trying out the new software. I've got everything loaded, I think. I'm sure it's going to be trouble-free, and we're not going to run into any glitches whatsoever with trying the new software, the new setup, and etc., etc. Let me turn down the camera's light just a touch, and here we go. I think we're in good shape. All right. So tonight's episode, we are going to boil things down to one ultimate conclusion. Paul is a scam artist, and he started a religion based off of other scam artists. And that is my plea to you. To give a little bit of a background on this is going to pick up where some of the Catholic was going, and a part of this is actually supposed to be a part of the Shroud episode 2, but the Shroud's just too big. It's too much of a monster, and so I'm just going to attack it through a different aspect. I went on Sunday with Kentucky Atheist and spoke to Daniel. Daniel is a Twitter, he's mainly on Twitter, and so, you know, we agreed to connect on Twitter. I connected to him and went to an audio only type of, almost a Clubhouse kind of Twitterverse that I'd never experienced before. And they were doing their drill down on trying to tell me that in my heart, I already know that God exists, and that if I finally accept that God exists, then I will have understood that I have always known. And they used Romans 1, which is very common for the Christians. And I warned them that, hey, there's a problem with Romans 1. And I gave them an argument that it is actually focused on a touch of idol worship. And they were not familiar with this argument. And so Daniel gave me a DM at Twitter and said, hey, could you pass on the argument? Well, as far as I know, the argument doesn't exist. It's all, it's all up here in my brain that hasn't accepted God and Jesus, and that, oh, thank you, BS. Look at that. If I knew exactly where the chat was. There we go. Oh, we should pin that one. We're totally pinning that one. Thank you, BS. BS, could you give me a thumbs up? Audio, video looks good on my end. I'd greatly appreciate it. And so where was I? So I said I basically replied with the DM that I plan on doing this argument now. So in my cold heart, I basically refuse to accept that there is a God. I refuse to accept that God wrote this book by God breathing, and that Jesus was the son of that God, and that I believe that the most likely portion of this is that there is a human beings that created some variation of propaganda, a combination of a Ponzi scheme, a phishing scam, and a Nigerian prince scam in ancient times. And they put the weight of a holy being behind to give it the gravitas so that people believed it. And I'm also going to argue that Jesus and God are idols. They aren't real. They're just idols. That's it. Good on both. Well, I am now solidly a StreamYard user, just for you, BS. And it feels like an itchy pair of underoos. The screen printing still is a little itchy. It needs about 3 or 4 more washings, and then it'll be fine. If you're as old as I am, you understand what that means. If you don't understand it, let's just say there used to be Tidy Whities, what was known as Fruit of the Looms, most commonly. Hanes had their own brand as well. And then when I was in my late aughts, Underoos came out. And yes, Stream of Turden. Yes. That's funny. And then Underoos came out, and they were a screen printed pair of underwear that were in the likeness of Spider-Man or Batman or Superman. And I believe there was a version for the girls in Wonder Woman, if I remember correctly. There might have been some later editions for Scooby-Doo, but I was past the age of Underoos by the time those came out, if I'm not mistaken. But they were usually itchy for about 3 or 4 washings. And then they were just as comfortable as the old Tidy Whities. All right. So enough about me. Previously seen on Jimmy Tux was this little gem right here on me basically giving the presence of a problem with Genesis 1 through 11. And it starts with, I believe, the scam starts anyway, with Genesis 2 in the Garden of Eden. Choose the knowledge of good and evil. That tree, that book, that holy book you deem as the Holy Bible, whatever you want to call it, your Quran, your Torah, your Tanakh, whatever you call your holy book, if deceivers are in the beginning of it, establishing a firm foundation of temptation, then the rest of the book is deception. So let me say this one more different way. The tree of life. We are all born. We have a choice. We live. Let's say there is a creator, and all he wants us to do is live. Live. Life. Or you can partake of this tree that is the good and evil tree, where you will be in a situation where you will think you're doing good and everybody sees what you do as good, but actually what you've done is evil, and you will surely die because you're no longer living. You're living under these rules of a deceiver. So today's premise. Okay. So that was previously on. And then I want to skip. So I basically do a summary of Genesis 3, 4, and 5, in which all the cursings that come down from God. God doesn't do any teaching. He merely does cursing. He never teaches. He only curses. In my opinion, there is a human author who has created a scenario in which he needs you to be broken and accept that you're broken, and therefore he can offer you the fix. And this is either done by the phishing scam or the Ponzi scam or the Nigerian prince scam or any variation of a scam in which you are coerced in some form or fashion into being a part of paying somebody, being enslaved, and no longer worthy of whatever it is that you should be actually worthy of. And then the way I know this to be true is because there's propaganda right in the middle that gives an ability for whoever is under this influence to rightfully take land that they're going to take in the future. The story is being set up that someday we're going to go take that land. And whenever the author is writing this, it's very telling, in my opinion, that it's propaganda to take the Canaanites' land. I told you all of that to tell you this. Let's go back to my girlfriend here. This is why we're here.
If Adam and Eve were the first people on earth, how did slavery start?
Wait a minute.
That I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, This is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine, and was drunken.
So we're snared into a net that we're pulled down from. We're all drowned. We didn't actually get consumed by whatever it was. Wanted to start over. So do you think he throws nets in again and starts fishing for us again? Do you think that's possible? Do you think God learned, the king learned his lesson the first time? Or does he leave the most righteous man available at the time? Does he leave it to him to do the cursing? Does he leave it to him to start the fishers of men cycle all over again? Let's see.
And he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it upon both their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants.
Well, that didn't take long. Wipe everybody out, get rid of all that cursing, and wouldn't you know it? Wouldn't you know it? Now, if you are a Bible believer right now, you're going, well, yeah, this is perfectly acceptable. The king can do whatever he wants to his subjects. Except in this scenario, there's no king. It's the most righteous man available to the most omni of all time. And cursed be Canaan. Now, as somebody who's done some scholarly studying, I know that this is Hebrews' justification for wiping out the Canaanites. This is propaganda against a people, against the land, against other gods that came before the God that is writing all this garbage, or the people that believe in that God.
Servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said,
Servants, servant of servants, enslavement. We're 5 minutes past the flood. We finally could grow something, get a little tipsy. I enslaved my youngest son and the land that he's promised over there.
Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And Noah lived after the flood 300.
Okay. Curses. All right. So that gets us up to speed on why I think that this human written document is used. Very simply, you have technically the grandson is cursed. The grandson, no, it's one of Noah's sons that's cursed, is put in enslavement. And then his grandson is Canaan, yes. But the land that is beholden to, right, I see what you mean. The name of the land that Ham is bestowed, that is now going to be threatened as the property of his two older brothers, is called Canaan. And then the son of Noah, of Ham, is named Canaan. Yes. And I understand where you're going now. Here. So that you know what I'm talking about. Correct. Technically the grandson of Noah. Correct. So let's go to Romans 1 through 4, a conversation. So I'm going to use the Bible Project as my guide here. Excuse me. And I'm going to use them as my guide as a nice summary. I'm also going to use a Yale commentary and a Catholic commentary.
In this video, we're just going to explore the ideas in chapters 1 through 4. So Paul opens by introducing himself as an apostle appointed by God to spread the gospel about Jesus, how he's the Messiah of Israel who was raised from the dead as the Son of God, King of the nations. And Jesus now calls all humanity to come under his loving rule. And Paul says this good news about King Jesus is, first of all, God's power to save people who trust in him, and second, that it reveals God's righteousness.
Okay, righteousness. So we have the same motif. Noah is the most righteous. And it's almost like we're replicating, in my opinion, we're taking the stages of Genesis 2 through 11, and we're replicating them in Romans. And I want you to imagine, basically he's taking and reinventing. This is the foundation of Christianity, is Romans 1 through 4, mimicking the foundation of Judaism in Genesis 1 through 11. And I want you to see the parallel and stream them and juxtaposition them side by side and see just how these things are very similar.
Now, righteousness is a rich Old Testament word for Paul. It describes God's
really?
character, that he always does justice, what is right and what...
Really? Give me a person. Yeah, that's fantastic. It's you will, in my opinion, as BS has just stated, you will be able to see and reflect more of the literary capability of human beings and less that there is an actual God, supernatural being, some variation of a creator. Instead, you will see, in my opinion, the contrast and the juxtaposition between a human being once upon a time creating either a power structure to live by, or just plain has evil intentions of being a scam artist. One of the two. Now, I'm not sure on Paul. I don't trust Paul. I think there is a high probability that Paul knew what he was doing and knew how to create a religion, and this is what we get. Let's see. I'm going to skip ahead to 522. But I'm probably going to come back to some of these, if I remember correctly.
Now, justification is another rich Old Testament term for Paul, and it's related to God's righteousness. It literally means to declare righteous. Because of what Jesus did on our behalf, we are given a new status before God. Instead of finding us guilty, God declares that a person...
Oh, I see what I did. I did the wrong thing. I looked at the wrong video's timestamps. Okay, 3:11. Sorry, folks.
Things. How? Well, he goes first into a long...
So this is a version, in my opinion, that I want you to juxtaposition Genesis 2, as I was reiterating in my previously seen, and Genesis 11. This is a quick reiteration.
Long creative retelling of Genesis chapters 3 through 11. He shows how all the Gentile world, all the nations, have become trapped in the spiral of sin and selfishness. The human...
So, in my opinion, you have a situation where in Genesis 2, he tells you the rules, he tells you to live. I want you to live. The creator being is saying, I want you to live. I want you to stay away from this tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay? The minute that the knowledge of good and evil is then implemented, I believe that's the moment in which, if you've been scammed, you have been scammed. If you ignore this, and let me use an example here. I want to use this example right here. So this is somebody at the pyramids of Giza. Okay? And he's explaining to us how these Egyptians scam the tourists.
Must be the most pathetic scammers at the pyramids.
Oh, it's closed? Oh, sorry.
These guys will tell you you can't walk there or you're not allowed up there.
This way? I can go this way?
So he finds out that this is a scam.
Then once they have your attention, they'll try to convince you to follow them, claiming they have the best places to go.
Okay, so once somebody gets you ensnared in their thought processes of good and evil instead of life, what happens?
Come this way to climb up to see everything. Yeah, but I'm okay, boss. I don't need no guide.
So if you choose life and you say, I don't need your guidance with the knowledge of good and evil, then you don't need to worry about the rest of the Bible. It's over. You don't need it. You're living. But if you fall for this scam, this Nigerian prince scam that's called the Holy Bible, if you fall for this scam that is a Ponzi scheme, a spiritual Ponzi scheme, it's over. You've fallen for it. It's over. You're no longer enjoying life.
Guide. I work here. No guide. Nah, I'm going to walk on my own now. I am no guide.
Yeah, I'm not a guide.
I show you Tom same ticket. I still want to walk on my own.
Yeah, I just want to walk on my own. I just want to do life.
I should go here. You don't have to show me nothing.
You don't have to show. You don't need to show me the knowledge of good and evil. I don't care.
About Willis?
You can only guess what happens if you follow them.
Come this way. I don't want to. Come to see. I don't want to. Beautiful. Thank you, sir.
That's the thing. People who work here don't just show tourists around for free. These scammers.
If there's a God, he doesn't just write a book about how everybody got scammed and then he murdered everybody and then he basically takes their grandson's land. These scammers in Genesis 1 through 11 are ever present, in my opinion. And Paul is replicating this in 1 through 4.
Are sneaky and will try to fool you when you least expect it.
It's that simple. So as soon as this camera turns around, another person is trying to ensnare him into the equivalency of follow me and I will show you the way.
I can't be here? No rest? Okay, I'll take more pictures then. Here I am.
Okay, I'll take more pictures then. This is how I feel I should be in this world. I should take more pictures when that person says I can't rest here and take pictures. You know why? Because this person knows that the authority isn't that person yelling at them. The Bible doesn't have any authority. It has zero. It just has people who follow it and believe it, who are ensnared by that hook, that fish, that fishing scam. And they're like, look at how wonderful the spiritual food is. Well, they have a hook in their mouth or they are ensnared in a net. They're just forced down by the undertow. That is how I feel about Genesis 1 through 11. And exactly how I feel about Romans 1 through 4. Paul is doing a dense version of the same tactic to get you under this scam. The Holy Bible scam. The knowledge of good and evil scam. So let's go back to the Bible Project. If I can find it.
Heart and mind are broken, Paul says. We've turned away from God to embrace idolatry.
Okay, so there's idolatry. Now, what is possible in idolatry? If you worship these trinkets, these statues, these statuettes, all right, what benefit gives any of us? Any Christian is going to agree, I don't need a trinket, I don't need a statue, I don't need a statuette. I have Jesus. Any Muslim is going to say the same thing about their Prophet Muhammad. Any Hebrew is going to say the same thing about their Moses, their Abraham.
which means finding ultimate significance in created things and then giving ultimate allegiance to these things that are not God. This results in a distortion of our humanity and destructive behavior. And so what's left is a humanity that stands guilty as charged before a just and righteous God. To which the people of Israel might say, well, it's a good thing then that God chose our people out from among the nations. He saved us out of slavery in Egypt. He gave us the laws of the Torah, like the Sabbath and eating kosher and circumcision. And these all together show us how to live as God's holy people. But, Paul says, not so fast. He recalls the storyline of the Torah and of the rest of the Old Testament, which shows that Israel was just as sinful and idolatrous and morally broken as the rest of humanity. Israel is actually more guilty than the Gentiles, Paul says, because they have the Torah. They should know better.
Okay. So, everyone is trapped in this idolatry. Now, if you are a Christian right now and you say to yourself, hey, I don't worship any of these trinkets. I don't worship any of these statuettes. Let me ask you, what's the possibility you do? And Jesus and Yahweh, and for Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, is a form of invisible idolatry.
And so, Paul concludes, all humanity, Gentiles, Israelites, are hopelessly trapped and guilty before God. But that is not the final word. The good news about Jesus is God's response. Instead of holding humanity guilty, Jesus came as Israel's Messiah to die on behalf of all people as a sacrifice for sins. As our representative, Jesus took into himself all of the just consequences of the pain, the sin, and the death that we have caused in the world. And he overcame it all by his resurrection from the dead. It's his new resurrection life that he makes available to others. Jesus became what we are so that we might become what he is. And all of this, Paul says, is how God justifies those who trust or have faith in Jesus.
Okay, so this is a very fair assessment. And in my opinion, you have, if you juxtaposition Genesis 1 through 11 and Romans 1 through 4, which we're about to conclude through the 4. But if you juxtaposition those two, it's a condensed version of saying you're broken, but guess what? There's a way. I can fix you. As long as you fall for this scam, as long as you come and get ensnared into this net, as long as you welcome worshiping some variation of a king or the king's prince and a Nigerian prince scheme, as long as you're willing to be a subject to the king, or just plain enslaved and enjoy being enslaved just because you're the youngest or the weakest, like Ham and his son Canaan, or the grandson of Noah.
Now, justification is another rich Old Testament term for Paul, and it's related to God's righteousness. It literally means to declare righteous. Because of what Jesus did on our behalf, we are given a new status before God. Instead of finding us guilty, God declares that a person is in a right relationship with him and is forgiven. Justification results in a new family.
Okay, so as long as you accept this king, you're now in the cool kids club, this new family.
The person who trusts in Jesus is given a place among God's covenant people. Justification also results in a new future.
A new future. What could possibly be the new future? The new future, if you've been enslaved. The new future, if you've been a victim of these untold treasures like a Nigerian prince scheme. This new future, if your information's been phished.
Which begins a journey of life transformation by God's grace. And so all of these things about justification are God's gift to those who through their faith are in Christ.
Okay. Now, I contend that doubt is a virtue. doubt is far more virtuous than using this faith. So let's see. Let's see if we can draw a connection here.
And so this leads Paul in chapter 4 to explore the huge implications that all of this has for who can be a part of God's covenant family.
Okay, so you're going to be a part of a family. Now, where does that family stem from?
He goes back to the story of Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. Before any of the laws of the Torah were given to Israel, Abraham was justified or declared righteous before God. How? Well, God promised that Abraham would become a father of a large multi-ethnic family that would receive God's blessing. But he and his wife Sarah, they were really old. They had never been able to have children. But nonetheless, Abraham had radical faith and trust in God's promise, and so God declared him to be righteous. And so Paul says, now Abraham has become the father of God's new covenant family, and it's spreading all around the world. It's made up of Jews and Gentiles who have the same kind of faith and trust in the one who fulfilled God's promise to Abraham, Jesus the Messiah.
Okay, it's Jesus. Jesus from Abraham. So I want to go and touch on the idolatry part just one more time. On 330.
Which means finding ultimate significance in created things.
Okay, ultimate significance in created things. And part 2 in this is...
and then giving ultimate allegiance to these things that are not God. This results in a distortion of our humanity and destructive behavior. And so what's left calls the storyline of the Torah and of the rest of the Old Testament, which shows that Israel was just as sinful and idolatrous and morally broken as the rest of humanity.
Okay, perfect. So I then want to go to wherever I have it. Here we go. So I want to play this right here. I want to start with this.
17, he gives us, I think, what's almost a thesis statement about the letter. And one thing about Romans is that it is structured as something of an argument. There's a connectedness to the letter that we don't have in some of other of Paul's letters, where the discrete problems are taken up, for instance, in
Corinthians one by one.
So the thesis.
So we've discussed that, and then we've got 522. There we go.
So, Paul, at the beginning of Romans 1, then, sort of sets the tone for the whole letter and sounds some themes that are going to be really important. And then what he does in the next 2 chapters is, I think in broad terms, to set out the problem that the righteousness of God was designed to solve.
Okay.
So he reflects here in a way he has not done in some of his other epistles, almost globally, sketching the human condition and the way in which God has somehow addressed that human condition. And what the heart of the argument is that sin is a reality that pervades the human condition. Whether
Universally.
No
exceptions.
Whether you're a Gentile or whether you are a Jew, there is sin in your experience.
Right.
And God, through Christ, has somehow addressed that problem of sin. So that's the overall structure here.
Okay. Now I want to touch on the idolatry. The idolatry of 1144.
And we begin to see what that might look like in our lives.
Right, absolutely. Maybe before we conclude, we ought to think about some of the little difficulties that pop up in these first couple of chapters.
That's fine.
What do you do, for instance, with some of the sins that Paul...
Well, I think that you set the context right. The context is that Paul wants to implicate everyone in sin. It's fairly clear how you do that with Jews. They disobey the law. Gentiles seem not to have the law. How can you blame Gentiles? And his prime example of Gentile sin is idolatry. And that leads into the complicated material about human sexuality in chapter 1.
Okay. So there's there's the idolatry and who's implicating. And notice that he mentions homosexuality. Now, it is, in potentially Paul's opinion, whatever Ham did while Noah was drunk was potentially sexual in nature, related to homosexuality-ish. So do you see a similar structure here?
I say about that is, within his context, idolatry is his great concern. Sexuality is a secondary concern. It's certainly one that's driven the discussion in our churches for the past 25 or 30 years.
Yeah, those verses are Romans 1:26 and following.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, the fundamental problem is idolatry. And then Paul says that is the source of everything else that's wrong with
Of which there's a
humankind.
very long grocery list, yeah.
And he mentions in here same-sex relations
Yeah.
of various sorts,
Yeah.
picking up on themes from Leviticus.
Exactly.
Which is not a concern to him in
Right.
most of
Right. Suddenly he needs it, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we have to keep in mind here is that this section, Romans 1:18 through the end of that chapter, is really kind of boilerplate.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to right here. Speed along.
Idolatry certainly is one of the main things that he talks about. Some other interesting features here is that he insists that people are going to be judged on the basis of what they do.
Yep.
And sometimes when we hear of Paul's gospel of justification by faith, we forget that there's also an element of
That
human
obedience,
responsibility.
absolutely.
And we're going to hear that theme.
Hugely.
Yeah,
In
moving
the
through
last part of
letter.
Romans, yeah. Good.
Okay. So I'm focusing on the idolatry because there is a story in the Midrash that I am positive that Paul, Jesus, apocalyptic preachers, Qumran believers in the 1st century BC and 1st century AD all knew and followed these stories. It's not in our canon, but they would have been the equivalent, in my opinion, of canon then. Damn internet. Is my stream bad? I hope not. Anyway, so I want to go to a quick summary of the story of Abraham in the Midrash.
Recite the story of Avraham working in the idol store of his father. The little boy Avraham chopped down all the idols with an axe. When his father came in and asked him what had happened, Avraham blamed the statues in the store. His father exclaimed, "That's impossible." Avraham said, "Exactly."
Exactly. So let me get this straight. If there is an idol and it could be chopped down, and Abraham thinks that they themselves are the ones who did it, but it's impossible. Exactly. Abraham is the one who brought, in my opinion, statues, statuettes, and trinkets to a level of an invisible creator, an invisible king with an invisible son. And human writers wrote narratives in literary form of how to get and gain and garner power through, whenever these were written down, the best storytellers to get their information to ensnare you in their enslavement, to ensnare you in their net for fishing, to ensnare you in their Nigerian prince scheme, their Ponzi scheme. The reason there is a Christianity is so it can piggyback off of this moment in which idol worship became invisible. It should be impossible, but it isn't. I have no doubt in my mind that the literary differences between Genesis 1 through 11 And Romans 1 through 4 is mimicking to create a new religion by literary means, piggybacking off of the success of idol worship being turned invisible. And the Muslims and Islam use the same piggyback for their prophet Muhammad. The same scam that you're seeing at the pyramids seems useful there too. It works. Makes you feel nice, warm, and fuzzy. But it's all literary. Every single word of it. It's all storytelling. It's a mimic of what was successful. And you see, in my opinion, continually in the New Testament, there seems to be a puppet that is always absent. You don't see the person who actually experienced anything. Paul didn't experience Jesus directly. He's under the influence of a dreamlike vision. Jesus didn't seek Paul out. He wouldn't need a Paul if Jesus did it right. No. I believe with the experience that Paul may have had from Qumran and his experience with the apocalyptic preachers, he saw a forest through the trees. And he created a religion. And Romans 1, saying that the most common verse of Romans 1:20. That's what you're supposed to focus on from the pulpit. But I'm telling you, the scam is everything that surrounds it. In juxtaposition between the scam of Genesis 1 through 11 and the scam of Romans 1 through 4. So why do I think Paul is a scam artist? Let's go to Christy. Good friend of the show, Christy.
We go to Philippians 4, starting in verse 14. He says to the Philippians, "Yet it was kind of you to share my trouble. And you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you only." In verse 18, he says, "I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received the gifts you sent, fragrant offerings, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God, and my God will supply every need of yours according to the riches of his glory." So he has let them know, hey, I got your payment. I have received full payment and more. We see this timeline, this order of events, where Paul goes to the church at Corinth. He sends them a letter after he leaves, and he says, I am not going to receive payment from you. I am not asking. I deserve it. I could receive payment if I wanted to. The Lord says I could. But you know what? I would rather die than you to take this boast from me. So I'm letting you know that I am preaching to you free of charge. I do not take money for payment. That's just not how I operate. Then he leaves. He goes to the church in Macedonia. He receives full payment. Who knows how long he was receiving gifts and payment from this church. And then it seems as though word got back to the church at Corinth that he was receiving some kind of payment. And this is why you see in the second letter, 2 Corinthians, him defending himself against these accusations. He said, I robbed these churches. Yeah, but I did it so I could serve you. And so he goes from saying, I don't receive payment to, well, yeah, I do receive payment, but I did this for you. because he's being accused, he doesn't need to give this defense unless there was some sort of an accusation. He's not going to just bring this up out of thin air, right? He's obviously responding to something. We don't know. We don't have the letter he was responding to. I wish we did. So we have no idea what this church was saying, what they were accusing him of. But we can make the pieces fit. When we weave the story together and we see this chain of events and we see Paul getting so defensive about his finances, at the very least, Paul was accused of being shady in his financial dealings. He was at least accused of it. And he had to perpetually give this defense against, these accusations. Now, of course, we don't know all of the details. We don't know for sure what was going on with Paul and his payments. But we can see that Paul makes it very clear that he is not receiving payment from churches. He doesn't even talk about receiving payment from the Philippians. He doesn't bring them up in his first letter to the Corinthians. But in his second letter, he has to give a defense and bring them up. Why? Because they did. They brought it up. They're like, hey, we've heard some things. We heard you're receiving payment. You said that you weren't receiving payment. What's going on here? That's just what I imagine was being said. And Paul has to give his defense. And he gets so snarky and he's like, psh, just bear with me in this foolishness for a minute. I was robbing these churches, and I really think him using that terminology, robbing churches, was a response to something that they said to him. They probably accused him of robbing churches. And so he was just kind of being snarky about it and making a point. And so it doesn't look good for Paul, in my opinion. To me, this was such a big kind of like moment of like, oh my gosh, like this guy was not this like honest, humble guy that they preached to us about in church. This was someone who was very shady in his dealings, who was constantly flip-flopping on what he was saying, who seemed to be lying to churches, or at least withholding information to these churches, and then getting accused by these churches of being shady. And then when he's called out, he gets just like really snarky and kind of flippant in his attitude. And we see that humility just kind of fly out the window. And it's so funny how he boasts without boasting. Like he says, I could boast, but I won't, I have this right, but I don't use it. Lucky you. It's this attitude of like, look how great I am. I'm doing what I want. You need to get in line. Don't listen to anyone else. Don't accuse me of anything. I was sent by Jesus. You better just straighten up and understand. He didn't want to be accused because he was constantly having to defend himself. And I just wonder why this apostle is constantly having to defend himself against other followers of Jesus. And it really just paints a picture of this whole Christian system where none of these Christians can get together and agree. They're all arguing with one another. They're all disagreeing with one another on how to approach these things, how they're supposed to behave. Should they be receiving money for preaching? Should they be boasting about not receiving money from preaching? Should they be lying about receiving money from preaching?
Okay. I want to go back to this scam one more time, and then I want to go back to Yale.
Here I am, taking pictures.
No, this is for good luck.
Oh, it's free?
This is for
These
good
must
luck.
be the most pathetic scammers
For
at the
free.
pyramid.
Just remember that.
Oh, it's closed? Oh.
These scammers are ever prevalent. Blah, blah. All right. So this is a page from an investigation done on Facebook from just after the report that came out on Russian troll farms. So religious pages, here are the top troll farm pages targeting religious communities on Facebook. They primarily focus on the Christian community, but they do have a few pages targeting Muslims. The top authentic pages were sourced from here and here. Okay. So on this report, all of them in the top 1 through 15, all of them, 100% of the top 20. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Of the top 20, 1 through 15 are run by Russian troll farms. 15 is the first time there's a legitimate position. The top pages are overwhelmingly for troll farms. The first authentic page is 15th position. And the next after are 20. So 2 out of the 20, number 15 and number 20, are the only ones that were legitimate religious Christian institutions on Facebook. 18 out of the 20 are designed to be Russian farmed clickbait. Fishers of men, Ponzi schemes, Nigerian prince schemes, Russian troll farm schemes. If you want to say it wasn't happening then, it's happening right now. In abundance, in grotesque amount of abundance. Let's go back to my Yale friends, wherever they are. I can't find them. Here they are. Let's see.
Thank you.
855.
Has caused all sorts of theological reflection. From chapter 3, verse 21 on.
I'm sorry,
Paul
that
says,
was
"Now,
825.
Handwriting. Yeah.
So it's a kind of clever dialogical scheme that Paul has working here, and you have to be attentive to the different voices that Paul is using.
So where does he go in trying to solve the problem he sets up? He says everybody has sinned. Then what's the beginning of a solution anyway?
The beginning of the solution, Paul sketches at the end of chapter 3. And this has caused all sorts of theological reflection.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead.
Acting through the fidelity of Christ, which has a beneficial impact on all who follow Christ in that fidelity, all who believe. And Paul emphasizes the impartiality of God and the universality of the message. There's no distinction. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, this is verse 23, but are now justified by his grace as a gift.
Yeah.
So God, the fundamental point that Paul says is that God has taken action to deal with this problem of universal sin, and it's an act of pure grace.
Yeah. Gift.
A gift.
Gift, not an achievement.
That's right.
Gift.
A
free gift.
That God has given to humankind, somehow connected with the death of Christ.
Yeah.
And that's indicated in verse 25, whom God put forward as, and here another translation problem, put forward as a sacrifice of atonement by his blood. That may be, it's certainly one way of translating it. It may be Paul's notion that Christ.
There you go. All right, let's go one more.
At the pyramids.
Oh, it's closed? Oh, sorry.
These guys will tell you can't. These must be the most pathetic scammers at.
Most pathetic scammers. All right, let's go for.
Abominable.
I want you to go back to Abraham.
St. Paul then says to the Jews, they know right from wrong, just as I did, because of the revelations that have been given to God's people from Abraham to Moses to all of the prophets. But simply knowing the law is not enough. They too need the grace of Christ in order to live lives of love where there can be no need for law, because love itself keeps people decent, whole, and holy. Now, in regards to these, so we have to study them quite carefully, and we have to see what the generations before us have said about these passages and what we could glean from them ourselves in our contemporary world. Reflecting on these passages, we see that we're all children of Abraham, all inheritors of a faith-filled way of living in this world and loving God.
Okay. My friends, my friends, I ask you to use doubt as a virtue. Use doubt as a virtue. Use the Bowtie 8. We need receipts that God is who he says he is. That Jesus is a supernatural being. That he's actually a God. We need evidence because doubt is far better than this. Holy Spirit, show me the goods that the Holy Spirit exists. Show me the goods that Satan and the devil exists. Show me the goods that demons exist. Show me the goods that angels exist. Show me that there is an entity in a place called heaven and an entity in a place called hell. Once you've secured that, we need the alibi that the deceiver isn't the one, if there are supernatural beings, isn't in cahoots with God in a Job-style bet, in some variation of a Luke 4, verse 6, Jesus' temptation. You prove that the devil isn't in cahoots with the Holy Spirit, that the devil didn't write anything in the Bible, not one word, and that angels that are in Revelations 12:9, that are the bad ones, aren't in cahoots with any of these, the writings of this book as well. You be aware of your free gift of salvation. If God so loved the world, gave. It is a literary function. A literary function that you can juxtaposition on how it was copycatted in a short form, short order for Romans 1:4. If you want to tell me that I can be wrong because it's written on my heart, I want you to show how doubt isn't the virtuous thing to have. With scam artists giving you free gifts of salvation. Scam artists wanting to ensnare you in their net and make you a slave. Ponzi schemes, spiritual Ponzi schemes that want to put you in the trap and keep you there and use you so that you no longer go and live. That a Nigerian prince scheme isn't ever present. That someday, if you help me now, untold treasures are going to be awaiting for you. If God really loved the world, he would have just hugged his son. If he loved Jesus, God would have just hugged his son. Because bloody Jesus is an evil so evil, it's seen as good. Normally I do a moment of Zen, but Abraham transitioning the statues in his father's shop to invisible heroes and invisible beings that are literarily written as the evil ones. That is our doubt, and that is our Zen. Bowtie Bless.
Of his father, the little boy Avram chopped down all the idols with an axe. When his father came in and asked him what had happened, Avraham blamed the statues in the store. His father exclaimed, "That's impossible." Avraham said, "Exactly." Another story features an older, more mature Avraham seeing a castle and wondering who built it. If the castle had a builder, surely, he reasoned, must the world. But the Torah doesn't begin with either one of these stories. In fact, it doesn't begin with Avraham's discovery of God at all. When Avraham is introduced, it is with God calling out to him to leave the land of his father and build a new home and a new nation. Why doesn't the Torah share the story of Avraham's discovery of God? Throughout imagined a congregant saying to his pastor, "Oh, I know he works in mysterious ways, but if I worked that mysteriously, I'd get fired." So where should people turn in order to find God in the mystery?